Yes.
What is sin, and what does it mean to be a sinner?
That's a great question. Sin is separation. Sin is separation. Because we're created to be in communion. We're created to be in communion with God, and we're created to be in communion with one another. It's that simple. And sin is separation. Anything that separates is sin. Anything that separates people is sin. Anything that separates people from their true selves is sin. Anything that separates people from God is sin. So, interesting wordplay. The word devil, right? The word devil, the root of the word devil means divide. The devil's in the business of dividing. The word Satan means accuser. So whenever you see division happening, you know that's the work of the devil. You say, that's the work of the devil. Oh, Brian says. Right? So anything, Fox News, of the devil. Anything that's in the business of just dividing and accusing and all of that stuff.
So then, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
interrupting you. So then, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis from Christianity, and I'm not a Christian, so I'm not speaking from a place of a lot of knowledge, but it feels like there's a lot of emphasis on repenting and asking for forgiveness, and we are innately sinners, and what is the second half of that question mean, to be a sinner, and how does that play into Christianity and the forgiveness and the guilt piece?
Well, I can't really speak for other forms of Christianity. So there are other ways of understanding Christianity that I think come from a different consciousness that I can't speak for because I'm not in. It's just like I can't speak for other religions because I'm not in that religion. I can't speak for that. But there is value, and I think it's helpful to reclaim sin language. And I think we've erred sort of on the side of that just seems too negative. That we've jettisoned sin language, when I think if you look around, we need to reclaim sin language if we're going to diagnose what's going on. And what sin is my propensity to live life too small for me. What sin is to let my ego mind, and if you think of the ego mind, the ego's job is self-preservation. And the ego lives in scarcity, and the ego needs to be important. So the ego lives in the world of comparison and dividing. And that's why it's helpful to know your mind is not you. And the mind is a terrible master. The mind is a great, exquisite servant. But it's a terrible master. And if you let your mind, driven by the ego, be the master, you're going to be in the business of dividing and living in the domination system and all of this stuff. If you live out of your heart and you train your mind to serve your heart, you become a completely different being. But sin is being trapped in this body that sees the world too small, that lives a life too small, and is driven by my ego. And in St. Paul's language, when you read St. Paul, you can listen to him when he talks about the flesh, like being driven by the flesh. He's talking about the ego. He's talking about being driven by the mind. Or in John's Gospel, there's a lot of, there's the world. We need to separate from the world. In John's Gospel, when he used world language, he's talking about here. He's talking about the ego. And sin is us being slaves to the ego, being slaves to that part of us that is living in scarcity and fear. And Jesus came to deliver us from living in fear. I mean, he said over and over and over again, don't be afraid, stop it. Because when you're afraid, you constrict and you live life too small. So he said don't be afraid, he taught about fear, and then he went and experienced everything we're afraid of. Stripped naked, humiliated, spit on, so that he can show that beyond anything is resurrection. So let go. If fear is what's keeping you from living, let go of that fear. There are other things, but that's, anyway, so the question was sin. So is that helpful?
That was beautiful. Thank
Okay.
you.